This podcast is brought to you by the FlexiSpot C7 ergonomic chair. Use offer code BrokenSilicon30 to get $30 off any order above $500 at FlexiSpot. And then also, this episode is brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com. Go to CDKeyOffer.com to get your Windows keys for reasonable prices with offer code BrokenSilicon that will save you 25%. Or use offer code DieShrink to save 3% off everything else on the website. And then it is also brought to you by Vite Ramen. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 10% off your orders there. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom. And today I'm joined by somebody who, well, you know, it's funny. This last guest episode of the year, and this is the last non-Christmas guest episode, I really wasn't sure who to have on. And then I looked around and I was like, well, I guess Meteor Lake is coming out. So, and, you know, there'll be the AMD AI event. So someone just to talk about AI would be a really good idea. And then, well, please introduce yourself. You reached out to me, actually.
Yeah, I'm Isaiah. I'm a developer over at Pygmalion AI. I'm working on a lot of our backend for our website, but I'm also examining various integrations with other software that could benefit from AI. And I'm here to kind of talk about what I've seen from AI and what people can expect from it going forward.
Well, and it's, you know, it's not just like your exact title, like at this company too. The fact that you work at Pygmalion AI means that you're also talking to tons of other people who do other things with AI as well. It reminds me of like Brian Heemskirk, who is a senior artist like at a game studio, but because he's at a game studio, he can probably also answer and ask his colleagues many different questions as well about every other facet of game development. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to have you on as someone who can do that, because I think that specifically, like, how would you describe literally what you do at this company? Like, and what got you into this line of work? Like, did you always know you wanted to do what you're doing now, or did you kind of stumble into it? Please, what's your background? And before we get into the nitty gritty, what literally do you professionally do?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, I worked in retail for a lot of years out of high school there, and I, on the side, was always looking up, all about computer hardware and researching a little bit here and there about code, and I got decently proficient in the Rust programming language. And because I knew that, and I was very active in the Pygmalion Discord because I was just passionate about the project, one of the devs asked for help with an API for one of the things in the Aphrodite engine. And I kind of hopped on and said, okay, sure. And then I kind of just sat in on a really important voice call with the project manager, Tav, and he said, you know, we really need a website like 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, sure. In like a month, I guess I can learn Golang and learn how to do web dev. And now I'm building a website.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually kind of funny. I actually bring up one of the reader mails from the end of the script here. Yoda King writes and says, hello, Tom and guest. How do you two recommend somebody gets into AI? And bring this up now because I think, well, you know, I suspect there will be a component of this to your answer, but it seems like every time you have a question like that for a guest, half of the answer is just get out there and start doing whatever you want to do with people, right?
Yeah, like the cool thing about the human brain is it learns what you're trying to do as you're doing it. So you really can start doing anything and your brain will fill in all the holes on the way. For AI specifically, I would say the hardest step is just searching up something like a Cobalt AI, Silly Tavern, and loading it up and getting started playing with it. And once you do that, you can start investigating things like LoRa, low rank adaptations, which is a really user-friendly way to fine-tune these models to your needs. And from there, you can really branch out and start writing raw Python scripts, and you can do some really cool stuff.
Now, speaking of cool stuff, though, what is the product, Pygmalion AI that you work at? What are you all trying to create?
In a word, we're trying to let people roleplay with their favorite characters and chat with them like they're right beside you. So there's a bit more to it. Like, we need to get large language models set up in the background, and we've trained or fine-tuned a few of those. And there's a lot of stuff on the front end, like how do you get that to be really immersive and interactive, and how do you ease over a lot of the difficulties with getting started running AI, because it's a bit more of like a developer thing at the moment. It's not super user friendly. And so we want you to be able to go to a website, click on a character and chat with them.
Right. And we spoke offline before doing this episode. The way you kind of described it to me was, and you may have to really explain every aspect and word of like what I'm trying to say here, because I'm really just, I shouldn't say I'm starting to follow this closely. I have been, but I've kind of intentionally stayed away from making sure I understand the most important aspects of things behind AI, because anytime, I think I've done what I'm doing right now long enough to know that I shouldn't try to cover something unless I'm going to do it well, because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know a whole lot. So if I say anything stupid or I'm missing some major aspect here, please cover it, not just for me, but for the people listening. But like, to me, it sounds like what you guys are trying to do is make some sort of AI model that any indie dev, for example, could take, and they could use it to write, either help them have understanding in a text adventure game. Like, you type in to the game, I want my character to do this. And then instead of either not understanding at all or requiring someone to have it the exact character is correct, your AI model can take it and go, oh, he said he wants to flick the light switch. That's the same as saying turn off the light. I mean, like, actually understanding what people say without having exact character matching in a text adventure game. But then also, like, coming up with the parameters for a character, like a side character in an RPG, and then having this AI model just write all of their text trees for the indie devs. Like, obviously, a developer might want to handcraft a lot of the major moments of a game, but for like side missions, this can just write a whole decision and question and answer tree for them, right? That's what you guys are working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, a lot of that is kind of going into the specific app integration that we're looking at. Like, can somebody embed our models into this kind of an application or this kind of an application? And, that's going to come over time as we mature, as we get a website, as we get our core user base. We can kind of look at expanding out into various areas that the individual devs are really passionate about, which is a good thing about us, is we can kind of do whatever we want, and our manager really empowers us to do that. And personally, I'm very enthusiastic about gaming, so I'm going to be pushing for a lot of that myself personally and my own commits. And a few of the other devs are also looking at kind of what they can do to embed that into other things. Like, we're looking at potentially doing Unity plugins that let you just have characters speak dynamically, or, for instance, responding to things the character types dynamically. Like, imagine in Skyrim, if you had just been able to walk up to an NPC and you just type out what you want to say. Like, that's a really empowering, really major change in how the game works fundamentally. And it almost makes like a completely new class of game. And I almost would compare it to going from 2D to 3D myself.
No, I don't know why. I didn't even think about that when we were talking before we started recording. Like it's not just about a text adventure thing. It's about, what if in a game you could not have these canned options of responding to a character where half of them aren't things you would say anyways, and you can just type, I want to tell this person that we should form an alliance, and the AI actually knows what that means, and within the parameters of the game might actually be able to do things that devs maybe didn't even intend to have be an option in a manner of progressing through a story or winning. Like this opens up, AI opens up the possibility of really turning on its head how you communicate with the NPCs, right?
So I actually have an interesting thought for you as well. It doesn't just change how you interact with the NPCs, because there's a technique called LangChain, where you would tell the model essentially, for sake of an example, summon monsters is something you can type if the player seems bored and they need something to do. And then in your interpreter that takes in kind of the large language model's output, if it sees the phrase summon monsters, in this case, it'll actually execute a function, typically in Python. So you can actually have the AI influence game state as well and dynamically change things according to what the player is doing and saying.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about this, I'm actually kind of surprised more people haven't been talking about like this aspect of how games could change fundamentally in the next few years. I think, and maybe I'm just speaking about myself and my own ignorance here, but like, I think most of the time right now, people are just kind of thinking about, ooh, soldiers will be smarter in one basket, and then the other basket is just kind of like, maybe things won't sound as robotic. I hadn't considered how much of the actual core gameplay itself could change in a way that we just literally couldn't do this before. Because if you're talking about smarter soldiers in a shooter, I mean, we can always make them smarter without AI. It might be easier to use AI, but we can always strive to make a smarter decision tree, right, without it. And we can always strive to make the multiple outcomes at the end of a game and like Baldur's Gate feel less silly. They can be good without AI, but what you're describing, it just wasn't possible before. I see your comparison like 2D to 3D.
Yeah, and there's a lot of major studios that are struggling to build like bigger, more dynamic open world games that are full of content around every corner. Well, here you go. Here's like endless content as long as you set it up right and you put a lot of thought into how you prompt these language models on behalf of your players.
Dave Schultz writes in and he says, hey, Tom and guest, when creating an adventure that uses AI to process a player's input, how do you make sure it does not get out of character? Do you have to hard code some safety nets in, or do you have to train another AI to keep the first one in check? Overall, how do you factor in and work around the uncertainty caused by AI in a game?
So that's something that actually is going to be a really major issue when you integrate it with games specifically. In a lot of the current front ends, they'll have an option for you to regenerate a response if it goes awry, or you can actually edit the response of the AI to be something more in the direction of what you're hoping for. And it'll pick up on that over time. So if you edit like 2 or 3 responses, it'll be very responsive to what you want in the future. In a game, though, you don't really have that option. So there's a lot of things that you do have to think about. In my experience, if you set up the character right, 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to get a pretty good response in line with what you want. And the 10% of the time, you get something very, very wacky. But at the same time, like, we've had physics engines, and every now and then they do something completely out of the wild, and like everybody just accepts it as a part of gaming. So
you're saying that aspect, it might be more of a thing of there's always going to be a chance that can happen, and it's still early. So your answer might be it'll get better, and we're just trying to get it down to where it happens 1 out of 1,000 times, not 1 out of 10 times. So
yeah,
it's rare,
exactly.
right? And most of what you're working on is not live happening. Like, right. For the most part, the early version of the product you guys are working on is generating a tree ahead of time, plugging that into the game. And then, well, because it's not running a live model in the game while you're playing, it's not, you don't need to worry about that. The devs had a chance to check it, right? Basically.
Right. So that's actually something that's not really at the behest of the entire project. And everybody said, like, hey, we should do this. That's actually something I went and thought about on my own, and I'm going to be implementing, hopefully, kind of in the next year here.
Mhm.
But the basic idea is if you think about rasterization, one technique that's very popular to use is you won't do literal ray tracing because it's rasterization, but you will bake that lighting into the textures. And so when the player looks at it, it looks like you have a really great lighting engine going on. And you can kind of do a similar idea with AI-driven dialogue is you could have a plugin that either generates responses from characters according to what a developer puts into the decision tree or the dialogue tree. But another thing you could do with it is you could actually make a persona for the character, the main character as well, and have the two characters act out a variety of dialogues in the dialogue tree, essentially autonomously. And you could have a player, or rather, a developer who looks over that and kind of double checks everything and make sure everything is good. And yeah, you can just put that into your game with no issues. And like, there's no AI running live, so you don't have to worry about any of the performance issues either.
So it's not just like you could have a decision tree that you check ahead of time, but maybe you could have several that one based on how nice you've been, like your nicest versus meanness meter. Over time, maybe the tree can just switch over to another pre-made tree. And because each of these trees, it'll take up a lot of data, but not like terabytes, right? So if the game
can be 100 kilobytes is a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, so it's like you could make thousands of these trees, though, right? You can't have endless, but you could have a lot, that needs to be switched between. So you don't really need to run the model in game for the time being. I guess
not in every game, but to get a lot of the benefits of the dynamicism of large language models, you would probably have to run it live for a lot of this.
Yeah, for the most impressive stuff that we're actually talking about that we couldn't do before. Chris Rich writes, and he says, large language models are, well, large. For a model designed to provide direct human interaction that runs inside a game, how much memory are game developers willing to use? How much of your job is trying to shrink down a general purpose model into something more optimized to a particular game? And what sort of computer hardware do you think is a reasonable minimum for such models?
Well, if we're talking about a reasonable minimum for models, I don't know if you saw Google's Gemini announcement, but they have a 1.5 billion parameter Gemini model quantized to 4 bits, and it'll run on Android smartphones locally.
Okay. So, but the things we're talking about now, like going from 2D to 3D in significance, that's sort of a model. Once it's perfected, do you think that could easily be running in AAA games now? And most people's hardware is going to run it. It'll run it. Like maybe there's a performance hit, but it'll run it. Or do you think it's still like a bit of ways for the truly revolutionary implementation to be ready for most gaming setups?
So I think that you can probably run an AI model in a game today on consumer hardware. The tricky part is that these AI models do scale. So if you're going at like a 7 billion parameter model or a 13 billion, a 30 billion, or a 70 billion, or like one of our in-house ones that is 120 billion, like some of the higher end ones there are not running on consumer hardware, right? But you can actually get really surprisingly decent results. with like really quite modest models that are set up and prompted quite well. And you could run them slowly while you're doing other parts of the game. Actually, one of the biggest issues isn't necessarily the hardware processing power. It's actually going to be RAM limitations. So if you think about the legions of people that are on an 8 gigabyte GPU, well, they're probably not running a game and an AI model that takes, 7 gigabytes on the GPU, but they can probably run it in an optimized fashion using some derivative of Llama CPP, for instance. And you can actually run that locally on the CPU at surprisingly okay latencies with the right quantization.
All right, so let me then actually start pivoting into a discussion about what hardware is actually required. And I'm trying to think of, because we have so much here prepared for us to discuss, I guess let's just jump right into Hawkpoint. We can get to the advancing AI thing by AMD later. So, AMD seemed very eager to come out on stage at their advancing AI event and say Hawkpoint's got 60% more tops than Phoenix. And, I personally think that they intentionally wanted the person who came on stage from Microsoft to say, we need more tops. That was intentional by AMD because they think they might beat Meteor Lake in that, or that they think they have some advantage there. Otherwise, why would they keep saying it over and over 1 week before Meteor Lake comes out? At the same time, it's not even 20. It's 16 versus 10 tops. And I'm kind of curious, how important you think that actually is. That Hawkpoint has 16 instead of 10 in Phoenix. How much of a difference is that actually going to make, not just in maybe if it will ever be used in future games, but just in the user experience of someone who has one of those laptops?
So what I'm going to say is, first of all, the AI engine isn't the only part of it. There is the GPU as well.
Right.
There is also the CPU, and it's fairly easy to really quite granularly go in and say, I'm running this many layers on this device and this many layers on this device and this many layers on this. So you do have to take it as kind of like a whole package, particularly for AI apps like writing assistants and so on. But for gaming, what I'm going to say is that the difference between 10 and 20 tops, well, that's double the performance if you're looking at, operating this in a game and you don't have access to the GPU. And that reduction in latency is actually kind of a huge deal in how responsive it feels. Imagine you're talking to a character and they respond to you, 5 seconds later versus 2.5 seconds later. That actually is
and
kind of a
you
noticeable
can see how they might
difference.
get around that as a developer, right? They might make a character. It'd be funny, like in Fallout 5, you type in something to a character and they go, and if you have a faster AI engine in your PC, maybe they go for half as much time, right? Maybe that's how maybe that's like an AI loading screen where they just have people, it just shows them going, let me think about that. And then, but if you have a faster PC, maybe that'd be something that devs have to think about as well, as if it gets unrealistic. Maybe all of a sudden everyone here makes decisions quickly, instead of thinking for a minute on like a Nintendo Switch.
Yeah. I think it's going to be one of those things that you're actually not going to notice until you upgrade to a new system, and then you go back and it's like, how did I live with this? Where it feels like everybody's in molasses out of nowhere. But there is one thing I do want to caution people listening about is more tops do help up to a point, but something to keep in mind is that we use a von Neumann architecture in our computers, essentially. And the issue with that and AI is that you're constantly moving data out of the accelerators and into RAM, and then out of the RAM into the accelerators, and so on and so forth. You're doing this 7 billion times to get a response. And a consequence of that is that current computer architectures are going to be memory bottlenecked at some point. So more tops will help, but it is going to depend on a device by device basis. Like how fast is the memory? How much is going to determine like how important the tops rating is.
Are you suggesting future games probably won't run on hard drives?
Well, okay, that one's funny, but I don't think hard drives are going to be an issue for AI-driven games. I think that's going to be more of an issue for asset streaming and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's interesting you touch on that because again, I already brought him up once, but I don't know if you've listened to the episodes with Brian Heemskirk, but like one of the recent ones he was on. He talked about how it's really interesting how, like, for example, on like the PlayStation 5, the way it's organized with, and a Series X to a certain extent as well, with all of its, co-processors and like a well thought out data streaming path for everything. You have a situation where, like, if you want to load a 1 mile by 1 mile map and nothing else, don't bring anything else into it. A PC, as long as it has like at least a 12 gigabyte GPU and 16 gigabytes of system RAM, it's probably going to do it like really well because the PC is just loaded with teraflops and runs at higher clock speeds than the consoles with CPUs past 5 gigahertz, not at like 3.5. And that's what the PC does really well. But if you have a single player game where you're bringing in crazy high quality assets back and forth, this is where you see like even a 4090 system just have these frame dips sometimes because it's not as streamlined. Like it kind of sounds like you're saying with those types of bottlenecks that we're already dealing with on PC right now that are a bit jarring, those are going to have to be even more well thought out if you're going to do this stuff with AI in future games, right?
Yeah, that's actually like a bit of a consideration is, okay, a game uses so much memory bandwidth, and usually developers aren't thinking about this too much right now because generally you're going to be more compute bound in a video game than you are going to be memory bound. But all of a sudden, there's going to be in 2025, there's going to be a lot of game developers who are running AI for the first time, and they're going to be getting these really weird performance profiles because they didn't take into account the memory bottleneck when it comes to running AI.
Mm-hmm. All right, and you also touched on like more tops helps to a certain point. What I've heard about Meteor, like obviously this will drop right before Meteor Lake's out, so we'll see how this ages. But like I've heard like a couple years ago, Meteor Lake was talking about having 8 tops. Recently, people are saying it has around 10. Maybe they've pushed it a little higher, and then they'll announce something bigger this week. But like, how important do you think it is? Like, so we know Hawkpoint is 16 tops. How important do you think it is for Meteor Lake to have 8, 10 versus 20? Like, if it beat Hawkpoint by 10%, does that really matter? Or does it have to be like 40 to really matter compared to that? Or do you think it's just linearly it matters as much as it is the difference?
So I think that comparatively speaking, it doesn't really matter unless you literally buy like a Phoenix laptop and a Meteor Lake laptop to compare them and you're playing them side by side. Like you're not going to notice a 5% difference between them. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's certain tiers and categories of performance where you're going to notice it, like breakpoints, you would almost say. Mm-hmm. I want to say leading up to RDNA 2, you actually did a video where you put various GPUs into various tiers based on their performance. And, you can kind of do the same thing with AI hardware. But what I will say is if Intel goes on stage and announces this revolutionary AI-driven APU for laptops and it's below 8 tops, well,
I don't think it's going to be below 8, but go on.
That feels pretty bad. But at the same time, if it's like anywhere in that 14 to 20 top range, I don't think it's super worthy of comment. It's going to be, it's going to feel good. It's fine. But if they go on stage and say, hey, we had to leverage everything, but we got up to like, 45, 50 combined tops, like you're gonna really feel that in applications. And keep in mind, like if we're talking about applications, combined tops matters. If we're talking about, just gaming, will this handle, future games that might use AI locally to an extent? Well, I'm definitely shooting for probably 15 to 18 tops minimum to kind of just run that stuff comfortably.
So it kind of sounds like the categories you're organizing it into are basically like 10 or less, maybe 11 or less. Then there's like 15 to 20-ish. And then, I mean, you could put another one in there past that, but it's really around that 40 to 60 tops area that is like the one above what we're seeing with Hawkpoint now, right? And it kind of seems like every upcoming APU from AMD is looking to do that as well. Is that like the different categories you would put them in right now before we talk about massively higher ones or something?
Yeah, that's roughly it. The reason you get that is because you have certain sizes of models, AI models, that are pretty popular. Like, because when you look at the researchers who are making these models, they actually size them to the VRAM available to them in data center cards. So, such and such model takes like 24 gigabytes or 48 gigabytes or 96 gigabytes of VRAM to train comfortably. So you get these very common breakpoints where you get 1.5 billion, 3 billion, 7 billion, 13 billion, 30 billion, and 70 billion, and so on and so forth. So I would say that at each of the kind of tiers, you're running either a larger model more at the same level of comfort, or you're running a smaller model at like double the response speed, which is like a huge improvement in user experience.
This piece of content is brought to you by the FlexiSpot Ergonomic Office Chair C7. The C7 allows for excellent comfort with premium materials and the versatility to allow for comfort in multiple sitting positions and an impressive weight capacity of 320 pounds. But for me, the most excellent thing about it was that lumbar support it has, and it's a really important feature for me specifically. I've always had lower back issues, and as I embark on trying to survive my mid-30s while being comfortable for at least half of them, that issue is cropping up more and more when I use the wrong chair for a day, and while my goofy and ever-shifting style of sitting positions just isn't helping me either, I needed a chair with really great lumbar support, and I gotta say, this has fit the bill. If you need a premium, comfortable office chair, click the links in the description and check out the FlexiSpot C7 office chair. Remember that just clicking on those links helps the channel a lot, and if you do need a premium chair, getting one helps the channel even more. Check out the FlexiSpot Ergonomic Office Chair C7 today. Now, another question I have as well is like if we were, for example, going to compare Hawkpoint to the Qualcomm X Elite, they're saying that has 50 tops, but at least preparing ahead of time here, I know that Hawkpoint has 2 to 4 sparsity like Nvidia does, where like, they can execute like they can execute like double the matrix at once or something. And is 16 Hawkpoint tops, is that actually like 50% more Snapdragon X Elite tops? Like, is the Snapdragon X Elite likely to be 3 times faster than Hawkpoint and directly comparable to Strix? Or are there some aspects in AMD's, and who knows, maybe Intel's AI engines, that means they're actually not 1-to-1? I mean, is it just the tops, or are these other features that we're talking about here, like sparsity? Does that make it so actually AMD might be a bit stronger compared to Qualcomm than people realize?
So, touching first on sparsity specifically, that's going to be something that's going to be really important. And I'm actually going from memory here because we actually don't see a lot of sparsity in the areas that I deal with. But I believe that's actually going to be something that you're going to be looking at the person making the model taking into account when they're architecting it, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's kind of going to matter insofar as major players in the space are actually doing that,
Mm-hmm.
which some of them might not. In gaming, if not everybody supports it, maybe they don't really do it as much. But more broadly, performance in general, I do think if you're talking about AI applications, I actually do think the Qualcomm Elite is going to be fairly performant. But there's a catch there. It does depend on how the application is implemented. If it's using a runtime that doesn't necessarily have great support for what Qualcomm's doing, like if your runtime doesn't support OpenCL or something, and Qualcomm does it all by OpenCL, well, you're not going to have a great experience, right? And you might not even be able to load the thing. So I would actually count on AMD and Nvidia to have better application compatibility as well, which is, a minor consideration. There might be one that you really want to try that only runs on them, or maybe them and Intel, for instance. But
and you think they will? They could possibly have one over Qualcomm, right? Is that what you're suggesting? Is that actually might be likely? That
I actually think if you asked me to put money on it, I think there's at least one application that might not run on Qualcomm for the first little while there, like 6 months to a year, or who knows, maybe it's like a shot in the pan project and they just do it because it's fun and then they never go back and update support for other stuff into it. I actually don't know how Qualcomm is planning to do the software side of their system. Like I say, they've done OpenCL before, I believe, with other accelerators, and they might do that again, but they might have integration with Microsoft's DirectML, in which case it's like totally fine. You don't have to worry. And I just don't know how they're doing it because I don't have their laptop. If they want to send one for me so I can confirm, they're free to.
Well, so it seems like it was really important then, right, that AMD put that AI engine in Phoenix. And that's kind of something I've tried to explain on consulting calls I've been on as well, is I think AMD put it on Phoenix just to make sure it was out there, because there had to be some day where there was a cutoff where if developers are working on apps for Windows or other operating systems, they go, oh, well, AMD APUs have had them since 2022, or I guess it would be since 2023. And that's why it's there. It's not that strong, but it's there. And if you're already planning for it, that means anything AMD is releasing after that will work all that much better with all of the support baked in from a year ago, right? How important do you think that was that they got that in there early?
Well, I would say fairly important in the sense that I've actually known about their accelerator since before they announced Hawkpoint, and now Hawkpoint is coming. And if I were a Windows developer and I were developing apps for Windows, it's entirely possible that I could have seen the writing on the wall and I actually could have already been looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a little bit of a catch here where their software development kit, like Ryzen AI, they call it, didn't actually release with Phoenix. So it's not really fair to say that devs had, so many months of experience with it because, Ryzen AI wasn't out yet for them to play with. And even then, actually, Ryzen AI currently only runs on Windows, and a significant number of people in the machine learning community and in developers in general, they do use Linux quite a bit. So there is a bit of software support there where they have some things that they can work on to build out support and have a more complete ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, based on what you're saying there, is it really was just to have a cutoff where they have had them for a certain amount of time. Maybe it didn't give them a head start in getting software support earlier. Maybe a small one, but it really mostly just was about knowing that. We have to remember that AMD tweaked Phoenix to make Hawk Point, maybe selling Phoenix chips at discount for years. Like the main advantage was just that. So when it is working, it's already there. Like that more so than the software, because the software wasn't even really ready until like now. You're basically saying,
yeah, actually, these things have like a 6-month delay. Like it takes time for people to actually buy laptops and to get into them. So you do want to get these accelerators in there. Even if they're not super performant, you do want them in there so that people have them if you do build the software for them down the line. And you also do want the name to get out there. Like I haven't been able to use the Phoenix AI processor, but I know it's there because laptops are out with it, right?
And I guess I must say before my next question that I have to acknowledge that AMD is still selling, of course, Mendocino, but then also Rembrandt and basically rebranded Cezanne. They call it Barcello now. But like all these other APUs that have no AI engine in them as well. But it does seem like that by the end of 2024, or should I say really by mid-2025, AMD is already going to want to be in a place where they've been selling at least a significant portion of their APUs with an AI engine. And then they're going to have like Strix Halo, Strix Point, and then Hawk Point, and then Escher and Kraken. Only really the very bottom won't have AI engines. And so at least they can argue that they've had a significant portion of their laptops have them on them for a long time. How damaging do you think it could be to Intel next year that, like, as far as I can tell, most of their volume is still going to be Raptor Lake, which doesn't have an AI engine?
So that's actually a bit of a tricky one where it does depend on individual developers who are like writing these AI driven applications. But something that I actually could see happening is if you're writing an application and you're writing it for an AI engine, because a lot of people are running around with AI laptops right now. And keep in mind, if you're writing an application in like 2025, well, you've had 2024, you've had like even a good portion of 2023 where a lot of people are getting Phoenix laptops at the moment. You might say, hey, I'm an app developer. I'm not an AI developer. I only have time and knowledge to support one way of running this. So I'm just going to code it for the AI engine, and if they don't have an AI engine, I guess it just crashes because I don't have time, right? But most of the frameworks that do anything related to AI, they should be able to run on CPU, even if it's slow, right? So I think you probably won't see too many hard crashes, but you definitely might not feel great using an AI application on, like, for instance, a Steam Deck.
Yeah, and it's like, if they're going to spend time optimizing for an AI engine, it's going to be the one that most people have. And again, there's been, let's just say, Xilinx ones out with Phoenix for years. And then if you're programming for, well, I'm sure Intel will get in there, though. I mean, they're a huge company. They're going to. In fact, I was just told by one of my contacts that already at Best Buy, they are making employees take training modules on how to communicate why AI is important in the Intel laptop section of Best Buy.
Could I interrupt and bring up one thing that occurred to me?
Yeah.
Okay. So AVX 512, if you're running AI on CPU, AVX 512 is actually a huge performance increase. It can be something like 8 times, I think, depending on the situation. So AMD,
and guess who doesn't have AVX 512? That's Alder Lake.
Yep. Which is silly because Intel actually pioneered AVX 512, if I remember correctly. But
and I've heard that AMD's Zen 4 AVX 512 actually isn't really even as good as Xeon X Ice Lake AVX 512, like in per clock. Like that, Intel's actually is really good when it's enabled.
Oh, yeah, it makes me a bit sad because I actually do like running on CPU from time to time. But interesting point. AMD either has AI engines or apparently really good, according to leaks, upcoming AVX 512 supports.
In Zen 5, yeah, it's a major focus.
Yeah, so you could make the argument, okay, so we've had Phoenix, we have Zen 5 coming up, which doesn't have an accelerator, but it has an iGPU and AVX 512, and so you're off to the party for like 3-4 years by like 2025.
Yeah, and it's impossible to quantify, but I mean, in terms of a yes or no question, it sounds like you're saying, like, because when I speak to OEMs about their Intel laptop lineups in 2024, they're all saying like 80% Raptor Lake. Like we don't want, so not all of them, but a lot of the OEMs say they really don't like Meteor Lake. So that means even if Intel does finally have an AI engine or NPU in Meteor Lake, it's going to be a minority of their volume. And on top of that, they don't have AVX 512 and anything yet. So AMD's had a head start there for a while. This could be quite an issue with responsiveness and support for Intel AI until it kind of sounds like Intel Arrow Lake in 2025. And then even then, they don't have like the lineage of, and it takes months to actually get those into people's hands. It won't be until like mid 2025. I don't know. It sounds like you're saying that could actually be like a huge advantage for AI support.
So it could very well be that AMD is in a really good position, but I do actually have a silver lining for Intel here. Their iGPUs on their main processors are actually kind of okay. And, it's been an afterthought for a long time, but they've bragged for a long time that their software team was bigger than AMD. So I think it's kind of time that they might want to show that and get some libraries written for their iGPUs, because that's the only kind of saving grace I see for them in terms of really responsive AI acceleration on.
They're going to have to spend the money to work with developers to make sure their iGPUs are used perfectly, and that's the one thing they could probably. That you could see them doing.
Yeah, exactly. And like their iGPUs aren't crazy good. I don't know how many tops they are off the top of my head, but hey man, that's what they have. I hope they use it.
So Florida Man writes in and he says, well, we heard about theoretical local applications in the last guest Broken Silicon. Only a few client run AI apps are available for Phoenix APUs as of now. My question on consumer NPUs therefore is, so what? Are we really about to get dozens of locally run AI apps supporting these products? Or is this latest push from AMD trying to spur just the beginning of the development?
So I'm going to say part of it, as we've noted, it's not necessarily we're releasing this hardware and everything runs on it right now, today, this second. Mm-hmm. It is kind of about slowly getting developers on board and, just having this stuff so that people can play with it. But with regards to AI apps, like arguably, depending on how you count it, I can name like a dozen off the top of my hand.
Top of your head.
Oh, top of my head, sorry, yeah. You have like a lot of people that are running AI locally, and it's still definitely like an early thing. It's not super mature, but people are doing it and they're having a great time. As I've noted, though, a lot of the people doing development for these AI applications are on Linux, and it's sort of this weird thing where ROCm, AMD's compute stack for their GPUs generally, is actually really well supported on Linux. So there's a lot of people like us. We have Aphrodite Engine, which just finished implementing ROCm support, actually. So if you have a Linux PC with a supported AMD GPU, you can actually go and run locally on that if you want to. But we don't have access to Ryzen AI.
Mm-hmm.
So iGPU is well supported, but the AI engine isn't. But then it's a double tricky part, because the iGPU, you can really only run it under Linux if you do some very specific stuff. You have to export an environment variable, which, long story, point being, you're technically not supposed to do it, but we do it anyway. that support for the iGPU doesn't actually then extend to Windows because AMD doesn't support every GPU across their whole stack. They support specific ones. So it's kind of a mixed bag where I think they really need to unify support across all of their hardware, or they're going to run into a lot of issues like this where some people can support some things on this platform but not on this one, and they might face some issues due to fragmentation of their customer base.
So, and that does bring up a new subject there, but before I get to it, just to summarize, I mean, it kind of sounds like you're saying, I mean, are you about to get 1,000 AI apps that are killer apps that you have to use every day next month? Probably not, but it's actually there, and there's teething issues with the software at these companies, but it's coming sooner than you think. This is a real factor you should consider in buying a laptop. You will, if you buy a laptop now, have AI apps that a lot of people like probably soon, and it will be a factor during the life of your laptop. Like, this matters, like, pretty soon. This isn't tomorrow, but it's close.
I'm actually going to come out and I'm going to let some egg get thrown at my face if I'm wrong about this. I'm going to make a bet.
Okay.
I think that by mid to early 2025, you are going to see at least 3 or 4 big name apps that people really want to use.
Mm-hmm. And so this is a very, very real. So again, and I think that was supposed to be like one of the main subjects of this episode is it's a bit, because I see people comparing ray tracing with Turing to like AI performance with the current APUs, where they're like, well, it won't even be really ready soon. So like, you really don't need to care about ray tracing with Nvidia's RTX 2000 series back then, because by the time ray tracing worked, you could have just bought Lovelace or something. But you're saying you think not only is this going to happen faster, much faster than that, but like also, I guess this is my part jumping in here, you keep a laptop for 4 years usually. So am I wrong? Your opinion is, no, this really does matter. You should think about it with the next laptop you buy.
Yeah, like that's kind of what I'm saying is you're gonna wanna, you don't need to base your whole decision off of it. Like I say, you can still run AI on GPU, you can run it on CPU, but do you want to be the guy where all of your friends have their writing assistants on their text editing app, and like they can just autocomplete a whole ton of stuff really quickly, and then you go to do it and it takes like 30 seconds and your laptop starts on fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is going to start to be like an issue kind of mid 2025.
Mm-hmm. And if you buy a laptop now, you'll probably still be using it in mid 2025. So it is actually a much more important and pressing consideration than, again, ray tracing in the past. But okay, I kind of want to pivot to this here. Compressed Earthblocks writes in and he says, does it make more sense to rely on GPUs for AI performance, or should we expect NPU style silicon and CPUs to be enough for AI use cases in gaming? And I'm kind of pivoting to this like thought here that I think it's safe to say that what you're looking at now for AI engines is kind of just the beginning, but like, are we really going to use if you buy a gaming laptop next year and it has 12 core Strix with a 50 TOPS AI engine built into the APU, and it has an RTX 4080 laptop GPU built in as well, in 2 years, or even 3 or 4, like, we'll give it some time, are there actually going to be games where they're like, hey, if you have an AI engine, you can run this part of the game. If you don't, you can't. Like, how is this likely to pan out in implementation by developers? And is it just going to be like it runs faster, uses less energy if you have an AI engine, but you don't need it? Like, how do you see this really? How are developers in video games actually going to leverage each individual part of a laptop? Like, what resources are they actually going to use in games in 2027 or something?
Okay, so I'm actually going to again risk egg on my face and make like a couple of predictions, kind of year by year here. 2024, you at best are going to see like a very gimmicky indie game that happens to use AI, and like maybe it doesn't even run locally. Like it might even be like just ChatGPT, right?
Mhm.
Um, 2025, I think you may see like a kind of serious indie game that maybe it has really good AI that runs in the cloud. Maybe it has like okay AI that runs locally. Probably not going to be super graphically intensive. And so
Mhm.
you have essentially the GPU and the AI engine free to run the thing. 2026, I think you might see like a double A game. Like, so not like a huge name, but like somebody is going to try and, run some sort of AI in their game. And this is presuming, no legal issues with it. But 2026, I think you could actually see these libraries all be mature enough that somebody could hypothetically hack AI into a game that they've started development by now. And then I think the first major AAA game that's going to use AI in a big breaking way is going to have to be early 2027, might even be a little bit soon.
Mhm. Oh,
Um,
so you might even push it to like 2028.
yeah, possibly with like a new generation of consoles right around the corner. And they actually might choose to hold off specifically for that.
No,
Um,
but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's why I said 2027 too. And the question I asked you, because I'm like, um, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's like you think, right? But tomorrow we may get a gimmicky AI game where people are talking about it, and it makes everyone realize, oh, I actually want my laptop or gaming device to have this because it's a gimmick now, but it's working. I can point to it. It's right there and it's working right now. And then a year after that, a real indie game. And then within the next couple of years, you'll maybe start to see some double A and triple A games where like mid development, they had a really simple use case, but it's real and they hacked it in. And then it's
yeah,
not 2028 launch of the new consoles. That's when it's really going to be real. Yeah, it's funny from that perspective. You would almost think that whatever. I'm pretty sure that like when Sony, for example, was working on the PlayStation 5, they had versions of it that were RDNA 1-ish and earlier versions of Zen. And I think there was a certain point where they were like, RDNA 2 seems to like have the efficiency and the early ray tracing features we need. We're kind of going to hold off until that's ready for the console. You think that might even be wise for the console manufacturers to go, let's not launch a $600 console 1 year before it has the hardware we need to run the next 10 years of games, right?
imagine if the PS1 had launched like 7 months earlier, and because of that, they hadn't been able to do 3D.
Yeah. Yeah, that's honestly, the more you talk about this, the more I go, again, it depends what you're going to use your laptop for. Are you getting it to play current games, edit, and you want like the cheapest dedicated GPU, 12, like, Alder Lakes on sale thing now? I mean, I can't stop someone for trying to get the best deal on getting a laptop for like $800 that can run current gen games well or something. But like, if you really do intend to have this for a long time, I mean, you know what? Let's just do it point blank. Should people wait for Hawkpoint and Meteor Lake, or should they get wrapped? Like, should they save $100 and get a Raptor Lake laptop, or should they wait for Hawkpoint and Meteor Lake, or should they just all be waiting for Strix if this is actually a once every 4 year purchase?
So,
Or
okay.
Arrow Lake too. I'm sure that'll have a better AI engine.
So there's no bad products, only bad prices. Something that's shown up quite often on this podcast. But I would say that if I was looking to get a Raptor Lake laptop, I would personally pay $750 US for a Raptor Lake laptop. and no more. Personally, bearing in mind that I run AI like every
Yes.
day.
But you shouldn't, in other words, that's you. You could say you have your own biases and
Yeah,
reasons
exactly.
for believing in it. But if we were to translate that conservatively, you'd say, do not get any $2,000 Raptor Lake laptop. That is going to feel
Yeah,
silly.
that would feel really bad in like a year and a half when there's like actually AI apps that you're starting to want to be able to run, and maybe like one or two kind of weird games that use it that you kind of want to check out.
And then you've got this 4090 laptop that can't even run an indie game. Like, that would
Ooh,
feel
that would
very
feel
silly.
bad. Now, I think at that point, like, you probably could run it on.
You probably still could, but it
How much
doesn't run it.
VRAM does the 4090 laptop have?
It's really a 4080. So 16 gigabytes.
Ooh, uh, ooh, 4K high settings, ray tracing. I don't. An indie game with like no graphics, yeah, okay, it would run it, but yeah. But at the end of that laptop's life, yeah, there might actually be like a game that has decent settings, and you can't fit the AI model and the game into VRAM on the GPU. Yeah, that would feel bad.
Well, I want to pivot into this question then, because this is something else we also plan to talk about. If there's Phoenix has been out for a while. You've got all these other AI models that people have been playing with. There's probably an indie dev right now who's like, ooh, I've got a good idea. Let me make this $5 game with a gimmick that launches in 2024. And they've already been working on it for a year. Like, basically, that was your premise for the 2024 thing.
Sure.
All right. If there is a AAA game developer who wants to, I don't know about GTA 6, but I'm trying to think of an example here.
Bethesda needs AI.
Yeah, they could benefit from it the most. I mean, all right, sure. Let's use that example. The next Elder Scrolls that will come out in 2089. No, I'm kidding. That will come out in, allegedly it should come out within like 3 or 4 years. So in other words, it should be one of those games that launches right before the next gen of consoles, I would guess, is what they're probably targeting with the next Elder Scrolls. Will that pan out if they want to put some AI elements in it? Like, are they going to be able to get this working on, and I think these are all separate questions, the PS5, the Series X, and the Xbox Series S, or if they actually did want to leverage new AI, they probably just need to launch it to next gen exclusively. How could you maybe get some of this stuff working on the current gen consoles, or couldn't you?
So it would feel really hard to get AI running on some of the consoles for sure. Like, oh man, a Series S, like that would feel really bad. Because where I would say that you start to see decent AI models is kind of in like the 7 billion parameter range. And so that takes 7 billion, 14 gigabytes of RAM divided by 4 is like, oh God, why? 3.5 gigabytes of RAM. Well, okay, you have like the entire Xbox system that needs to run on top of that. So that's like another 2 gigabytes, I think, something like that. And then you need to fit the entire game settings on it. I don't know, man. I don't think like hypothetically the next Elder Scrolls is going to feel like a next gen game if you have like 4 gigabytes of RAM to throw at the thing.
Right. So I can see the Xbox Series X and especially the PS5 with its extra co-processors and faster SSD. You take 4 gigabytes or 3.5, you say, out of the PS5. You can still fit the rest of the game in there. You can. I mean, it'll just lower res textures. Maybe they have to swap things out a lot. But you're saying the Series S, no way.
Well, yeah, that would feel really bad.
It's a good thing that Bethesda isn't owned by Microsoft, who's probably going to force it on the Series S.
Although, here's a way they could do it. Nobody liked it, but do you remember the Nintendo Switch cloud Kingdom Hearts installation?
I heard about that. I know nothing. What was it? I've heard people talk about it, but I honestly don't know what that was.
So I didn't buy it personally, but I believe that there was a release of the entire Kingdom Hearts collection on Switch, and they actually just couldn't get it running on the Switch. So what they said is, okay, we'll just run it in the cloud. And I believe a lot of people, particularly in Australia, had actually a lot of issues
Oh.
playing it.
How much of it was on the Switch? Did you have to install it and then it just leveraged cloud computing? Or did it no, it was just streaming the game?
So I didn't play it personally, but I believe that that was actually like a Stadia style situation. So purely in the cloud. By the way, sorry, I have to interrupt this tangent I'm already on to say it really sucks that Stadia is dead, because Stadia would have been perfect for AI, because you could have shifted around resources. You could have had AI running on Google's T4 GPUs, and it would have been just like an absolutely great experience. And like you're already online, so like who cares if you're running the AI in the cloud, right? And it would have been super easy for game developers to plan for that platform. But anyway,
well, yeah, but Microsoft is really driving hard with AI, and they do have xCloud. So I mean, I guess actually, as much as I was just sounding pessimistic, it's like, yeah, but maybe that gives Xbox even more of a push to say, hey, we got a version of it working on Series X, but you can stream it to the Series S if you want to. Like that, you're saying that Bethesda would be wise to do that instead of try to run it on the Series S at all.
The only way you could get like a good quality next gen experience is you would just run the AI in the cloud. It wouldn't even be that hard. Like you could literally take like a Series S SoC, and you could put that in a server somewhere, like with no game running on it, and you could run just the AI, and it would be fine. Like, it wouldn't be like the best possible model or anything, but you could have a really good experience with it. But I don't think that you could run a game and the AI locally in like an end of gen title.
And do you think that's likely to just happen for all of the consoles? Like all of them are going to require streaming the AI if it does run on even PS5 or Series X? Or do you think that they could get it to maybe work by like spreading? Because I think we spoke offline about this. Like you said, like for example, on the PS5, if they are going to try to run one of these models in a game on that, they're likely to just pull a little bit from everything. Like they're likely to go, is there some part of this we can just run through some of the co-processors, like the 3D audio part of it? Can we also maybe use some of the system RAM, but also try to have a space on the SSD that's streaming? And like that, maybe there is a way to, if they put in the effort, just spread out the resources across all of the little special things in these the 16 gigabyte consoles to kind of make it work.
Yeah, I think it could just barely, you could do it if you were really careful about how you planned everything out, and you said, okay, we're running, this many layers on CPU, we're running this many layers on GPU, okay, we're using this much RAM bandwidth, so like we have to stream some of the parameters directly from the SSD, and like this whole solution's really ghetto. If it was on GitHub, we'd get roasted by like all the random indie developers, but like it's fine, it's a console. We know exactly what's going on here. So this is teetering on a knife's edge, but it can be done. So I think people could do it. But if they're already looking at like a cloud implementation for like a Series S, I also think the temptation is there to just push
if we're going to build that
the AI to the cloud and then say, well, now we can make the game look definitively next gen.
Compressed Earth Blocks writes in and he says, until the PlayStation 6 launches, will the things you're working on be something that PC gamers will have an advantage with to such a degree that it really won't even run at all or at the desired performance levels on consoles? Or do you think it can be run reasonably on current gen hardware? And I think this is an interesting question too, because this could be one of those things that we saw like with the 360 in the PS3 era, where at first, I don't know if you'll agree, the PS3 and the Xbox 360 for their time had like really strong CPUs. And actually at the start of that console, we had a situation where a lot of PC gamers with single or dual core setups had issues in games being ported that kind of needed 4 cores, right? But then by the end of the generation, those consoles had so little RAM that they didn't work on that. Like there was this I think that's one of the things that really started the PC gaming renaissance, like around that 2010-ish area, is because, well, the consoles give you a lot of bang for your buck at first. I think much like the Series X and the PS5, by the end of that, there was some new stuff going on where they just didn't have enough RAM. Like, do you think a similar situation could appear in a couple of years with AI in the PlayStation 6 and Series X, where everyone was saying, I'm leaving PC gaming, but then, well, by the end of the generation, actually only PC gaming is doing some of these experiences well?
Well, okay. So let's take a look at something like, just for sake of example, an APU Strix has like 12 CUs, I think, right?
Strix should have 16.
16. Okay, so 16 CUs. And I don't know, what does the PS5 have? It has like 40 CUs of
36.
RDNA. 36?
Mm-hmm.
Of kind of like a custom almost RDNA 3, I think, or was it?
It's really mostly aspects of like RDNA 1.5-ish and 2 with a custom geometry engine that some people suggest pulls from RDNA 3.
Oh, okay.
Let's just call it RDNA 2.
RDNA 2, okay. So you have 36 CUs of RDNA 2 on the PS5, and now you have like this Strix SoC that has 16 CUs.
RDNA 3.5.
Yeah, okay. So I don't know, man. Like in the end of 2025, start of 2026, I think you could actually see an APU that performs roughly at graphical parity with a PlayStation 5 if you wanted to, and then also has an AI engine for running AI-driven content. Mm-hmm. So that's not even like looking at what the GPU is going to look like in 2026, right?
And do you think a lot of developers are going to do that, by the way? They're going to say, we're using the combined tops of your integrated graphics, your AI engine for the AI part, and then we're allowing your dedicated GPU to just handle all the graphical stuff. Maybe even still on PC. I mean, on PC, Intel CPUs have integrated graphics. AMD ones do now, too. They're like crazy weak, but could you see them trying to like leverage those even on desktop, not just laptop?
I actually think that like the existing AI backends are kind of a good trial for this, where you have Cobalt AI, and Cobalt AI like literally lets you choose how many layers that you're running on any given device. There's Uba Booga's Web UI. Great name.
You AI companies, you love having goofy names like Hugging Face, and it's hilarious.
But you have Uba's Web UI, and I believe that has like a quote unquote low VRAM parameter, which lets you move some of the processing off of the GPU. And then they also have a CPU only flag, which is purely on the CPU. So you can kind of choose what you're doing, but I don't think you can choose like literally which layers are on which device. And then you have something like our own internal Aphrodite engine, which piggybacks off of some of the other backends for their settings and so on. So you can do it whichever way you want. And so I think you might see fragmentation like that in AI apps, where maybe some of them will really granularly go in and say, okay, we're splitting this really evenly. But some of the AI apps might be like really intensive, and it's like, well, it's memory bottlenecked anyway, so we're going to choose just the GPU, say. But okay, if they don't have one, we'll run it on CPU, and we're not going to optimize it at all because like we don't expect many people to be doing this.
And that's kind of my question too, right? Do you see like these games actually, in effect, like they're just going to have like two ways of running? It's going to be the laptop mode that wants to use the AI engine to save on energy and leverage that extra performance. And then there's the other mode for desktop and maybe future consoles where they're like, we just use the GPU to like do the AI calculations and a ton of RAM or CPU.
I think you're going to see that in games a lot when you have game developers who maybe haven't run an AI application before this, and they're implementing it for the first time in their game. And they're like, well, I don't know how any of this works. I hear that I'm supposed to run it on GPU, so I guess I'm throwing it on the GPU, Like the specific implementation is really going to depend on developer. But a lot of the backends, a lot of the things that you can use to run AI do support like these variable settings. So I don't know, maybe we could see something like you can already set like setting sliders in games. Maybe there'll be a slider for like how big an AI model you want, like for how much quality you want for AI. And then maybe there'll also be something like how many layers do you want running on this device? And maybe they'll just push it off to the gamer and let them figure it out.
Feeling like you're imprisoned by ridiculous pricing on Microsoft software? About to give up on finding reasonable prices for stuff you're basically just forced to use? Well, there's no need to do that. Just go to cdkeyoffer.com during their Black Friday sale. This piece of content is brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com and their Black Friday sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, cdkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product that I honestly just think this community needs to balance out all the nickeling and diming going on in PC gaming these days. And that's fair pricing on essential Microsoft operating system and Office software that you just basically have to use whether you want to or not. There's no need to overpay for everything when you can save money on some of this stuff. And you know, the Moore's Law Dead team has been working with cdkeyoffer.com for a long time, and we still do. Whether it's me and Jesse's desktop, my girlfriend's gaming PC, or Dan's desktop, it's all powered by software we got for a reasonable price from cdkeyoffer.com. And you can join us and support the channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on Microsoft software, or you can use the code DieShrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like Steam, EA, or Ubisoft keys. Using either of these codes helps Moore's Law is Dead, and it saves you money. So support yourself and this channel by supporting cdkeyoffer.com with those offer codes today. Yeah, and so a question I have then is, if someone's building a gaming PC right now, and now let's forget laptop, desktop, they're building a gaming desktop this holiday season, what should they consider really anything in planning for being able to run AI apps? Like, is it just make sure it's one of the latest GPUs, make sure you have it, if you are concerned about that, at least 8 cores, 64 gigabytes of RAM? Like, is there any real advice you can give a desktop PC gamer for planning for the next year? Or is it kind of not yet, upgrade when it really matters?
So if you're an early adopter and an enthusiast, you're going to have no issues running AI apps with like a 4090 or a 7900 XTX, which is supported in ROCm currently. Which, by the way, not all of the latest AMD GPUs are supported in ROCm. I believe the 7900 XTX and now XT are supported, but the rest are not. Which you can, if you're a Linux gamer, you can actually still export the environment variable and they run fine. But on Windows, you're a bit more limited, I believe. But if you're looking at anything with less than, I'm going to say 16 gigabytes of VRAM, my advice is do whatever you can to save money, because it's going to be cheaper and easier to run AI in 2025. With the caveat that if you are going to be running on CPU and like that's your plan, okay, cool. Get the fastest memory you can, because the memory bottleneck is very real. And shoot for something like a Zen 5 on desktop and you'll be fine.
So here's an interesting question, though, because I think one of the best budget GPUs you can get right now is the RX 6800 16 gigabyte for $400. I just checked Amazon. I'll put a link in the description to it. It is still just $400 for the 16 gigabyte card. I mean, maybe it won't do 4K 120 in all of the latest games, but it does have 16 gigabytes of RAM for a really low price. Does it matter that it's RDNA 2 if they're planning ahead to play some AI indie game or not?
You picked a very funny example, because the RX 6800 is a AMD calls it internally like a GFX 10.1 or something, I think. Basically like a Navi 21 GPU. That is actually supported under ROCm, if I'm not mistaken. So you picked
So
like
your
the
answer is
one.
yes.
You picked like the one where, yeah, okay, that one's fairly well supported. It has a lot of VRAM. You're getting it for a great price. I could actually get behind that if you said like, okay, I want an AMD GPU that'll run AI, and that'll do it.
So yeah, that would, so it's not an issue that it's RDNA 2. It's just like kind of random how well supported it is.
Yeah,
Is what you're saying.
the RX 6400 I think is supported, but not like the 6500. I might be mixing that up. The RX 6700 XT is not supported. It's kind of it's a little bit all over the place at the moment.
But number one, have good RAM, have over 32 gigabytes of RAM, and have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Right? Is that the list?
You want to have about double the system RAM to VRAM if you're running AI models.
At least. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So 32 gigabytes would probably be okay, though.
Yeah. Particularly in that pairing.
Okay. Well, all right. Now, the next question I have, though, is we've kind of covered like what people are probably going to look for, and it's funny because you have the same answer every game developer who's come on this year said is you need more VRAM. That's basically your answer. But for like the next gen consoles, how do you think they're likely to solve this? Like, do you think, and it's still early, but I'd say within 2024, Sony is going to have to be close to deciding roughly what their next gen console should look like if it's going to launch within 3 years after that or so. Like, do you think that they should have like a how do you think they're going to do it? Like, just will they have AMD make them a custom AI engine for the PlayStation 6? They'll just take it off the shelf from whatever is after Strix or probably after even that. Or do you think there might be some weird thing they do? I mean, they did make the cell processor. That didn't turn out well, but they have made, these custom memory controllers. I forgot the name of the company that they worked with for the PS5, but audio engines. Like, do you think they're likely to maybe work with Qualcomm or someone on making a custom AI engine for their next gaming device?
So, okay. I can't tell you what they're likely to do because I don't have a crystal ball, and that's really far out.
I agree. I understand how hard this is.
But what I would personally be looking at if I'm, at Sony, I'm sitting on the board, I have contacts at AMD, they do a lot of semi-custom designs for us, so on and so forth. AMD actually has some really impressive quote-unquote compute in memory modules. And I think they partnered with Samsung to do it. And the idea is that if you remember that memory bottleneck I brought up earlier, where you constantly have memory being moved around between the processor RAM, and that's really where your bottlenecks in AI come from, is our hardware is just not really built for it. Compute in memory is a bit different, where you're directly moving the information through the areas where it's being computed. You could kind of visualize it, if you like a river and the rocks spinning the water as it passes by as the computation going on, right? As opposed to some beleaguered office worker moving a paper onto their desk, writing something, setting it in the stack, searching through the stack, putting the next one on the desk, writing up, So I would actually be looking at something like a compute in memory module from AMD, and I think they'd be pretty happy to work on something like that by that point in time. But hey, man, Tenstorrent has really good stuff. I could totally see them doing like a semi-custom design, because they're already doing that for like seemingly like every automotive manufacturer.
Though, I think something needs to be pointed out here. I think one big asset that Sony and Microsoft have had is they're using, roughly speaking, the same stuff that AMD is selling on desktop and laptop. And because of that, developers have a very easy time, building games for it. Like, I think that it's probably too early, unfortunately, for Sony, for example, to make this decision yet. But, I think it would be wise to just wait a couple of years. And then when you're close to finalizing what needs to be in the next gen console, you just need to look at like what's the standard in game, becoming the standard in games, and build it around that. I would think so. Developers don't need to like learn a whole new thing for your console. At a
So
minimum, that I would say that for Microsoft because of their market share.
So I'm actually going to note an AI model. All it is it's like, let's say, 7 billion parameters stored in like just a file. Like you could call it a text file if you wanted to. And then like 500 lines of C code, which is like not that much because all that AI is really, if you break it down, is it's 4 operations repeated like 7 billion times. So I actually don't think there's a huge issue with having custom hardware for
All right,
running
take it back,
AI. Because from a developer experience standpoint, it really is not like you have to learn a whole new paradigm. It really is just, what name of hardware am I running? And you change the name in the Python file, and it's like, okay, cool, good. And I mean, there's a little bit of research you have to do in terms of like, how, what width you're going with, and this, that, and the other thing, and like, but that's not like an architecture thing where you have to learn the whole architecture. That's like a Wikipedia search thing where it's like, okay, this has this much SRAM, so I can do this, and then this has this kind of cache line, so I do this, and you're done, right? And a lot of these frameworks, like PyTorch and so on, actually can abstract a lot of this stuff away for you. And I certainly think by the time that a new console came out, we would have way better abstractions than we have currently. And already, it's like really not that bad. So
yeah, it is just who can make the best one for the right price. Like, go with that, and that is what's going to decide if they have some special custom one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so personally, my vote, compute and memory, or like a special accelerator from like TensorTorrent if they pan out, so on and so forth. But obviously, they may choose to go with something different. Like I didn't expect like an enterprise SSD in the PS5. So they may come up with something that I can't. Maybe they'll like revive Optane. I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think too. Like, I've already, like, I think a year ago, I had Dave Eggleston back on and talked about like how for next gen consoles, it really might not be a bad idea to have this new layer of like CXL-ish storage. Not exactly CXL, but something close that you can just run these games fully in memory, like the next level of that. That would also benefit AI immensely, wouldn't it?
Yeah, like the number one thing that we're always looking for is just we need a lot of memory and we need like a lot of bandwidth. And if you give us that, we're happy.
All right, so I want to pivot to this subject here. AMD just did their Advancing AI event, and of all the things they revealed, there was ROCm 6, which is launching this month. There's a ton of focus on how they're improving their software, like with Triton 3.0, supposedly allowing for out-of-the-box support for AMD accelerators at higher levels. There's the MI300X and an MI300A that leads H100 in many different tasks, has better efficiency pretty much most of the time as well. And of all the things they announced, of course, there's all of their APU announcements, which we've already discussed, and Microsoft coming on stage to talk about how they're going to use them. Of all of the things announced at AMD's Advancing AI event, and please tell me if I missed one that's more important, like what do you think was the most important announcement they made?
So there's one moderately important announcement that I've actually brought up that they did not make, and that was they did not offer like support parity across their entire consumer GPU software stack, which everybody's asking for. But anyway, leaving that aside, Triton 3 it matters for really big companies to an extent, but I don't know. Like, I don't hear anybody talking about Triton ever in the open source community. Like, it's brought up once when there's like a new major announcement, but like, I don't even know if there's an open source AI project that I've worked with that has like a Triton backend. Now, like, I might be wrong on that, but I'm actually fairly confident now that I think about it. So I don't think that's a huge thing. I think that's a thing on the level of like when they announced that Hugging Face, all of their models would support AMD hardware, for instance. It's a nice to have. Like, it's another block in their support pyramid.
But it's like something they had to do, not like changing things. They have to keep having better support, right? So of course, like if they wouldn't do that, that would have been important because they're not doing the bare minimum what they need to do to get more support, right? Is what you're saying.
But yeah, like AMD's strategy, as far as I can tell, is they're actually going into individual projects strategically, kind of similar to how they picked out Xilinx and acquired them. And they're saying like, okay, you do this, and like we want support, so we'll sponsor you, and we'll weather's great, we'll make money. But that's not like huge in the open source community yet. Like, I don't know, maybe like that'll start picking up and people start doing it, but I'm not seeing it in any of the projects I've looked at.
So was MI300 the most important thing then, would you say, or was it the APUs?
I actually think the APUs were like a lot bigger a deal because we're kind of getting out of the phase where everybody and their dog is training AI. Like, there was this huge rush to get all these GPUs to train AI, and that's dying off a little bit here. Like, it's still happening, but not with the same level of fervor. But getting developer support in 2024, I think you can basically predict the success of a hardware company in 2025 by the number of developers using their hardware. And I don't see a lot of like, you might call them like hobbyist programmers. I don't see a lot of weekend warriors going out and buying like a $20,000 MI250X when you also need like a $20,000 server to put it in, right? So I think MI300 does matter for AMD's direct partners. I think it matters for their success as a business, but I don't think it matters that much to the broader AI community.
It's just another shovel that they can use when they need it instead of NVIDIA.
Mind you, at the same time, like from a developer experience, if you're renting GPUs in the cloud to train your models, like not having to deal with parallelism is nice. And like, especially if you're a new AI dev and you're like, well, I guess I'm going to try training a model and I'm going to rent this GPU for like $300 for the month. Or, well, not for the month. That would be for less than that. But anyway. And you might say like, okay, I'll go with an MI300 because it has so much RAM that I don't need to parallelize at all.
And it just seems like, right, NVIDIA H100 came out at the perfect time.
Like, how is Jensen always in the right place at the right time? It's weird.
Right. Is there a chance, though, but you're saying the market's changing. Is there a chance AMD could be with their APUs, or is it just good timing, but not the perfect timing? Or because it seems like they're going to be there with Strix with an AI engine at least as good as Qualcomm's, with Intel kind of no AVX 512. Meteor Lake's the minority of what they will be selling next year on laptops. Arrow Lake really won't be ready, based on what I've heard, until like the beginning of 2025. Like, is maybe there this magic timing event happening, though, at least with their APUs, when apps will actually use them?
I actually think that I don't know if I would say this comparatively speaking, but like,
right, because
H100 launched at like essentially the perfect time. Like, could you engineer like a better timing for H100, right? But I think in a similar, but probably not as extreme a way.
Agreed.
AMD's APUs launching when they are now is super important because they need developers on the floor, like writing apps with support for AMD. In my system currently, I have an RTX 4000 SFF. It's just shy of a 3060 Ti in performance and has 20 gigabytes of RAM and only takes 75 watts of power, by the way, so no power connector. But anyway, I bought that because I needed it for stuff I was doing, and AMD didn't have any support in any pre-written scripts for training LoRa's, low rank adaptation. That was Nvidia exclusive, essentially, unless you wanted to write the whole thing yourself. So I think it's important that AMD doesn't miss out on stuff like that, and they need developer support. Is like the number one thing they need to focus on in 2024 to set up for 2025, I would say.
So CRCV writes, and it says, from a developer point of view, is there any difference for using an already trained model between AMD, Intel, and Nvidia? And is there any specific needs that any of those should tackle in their future releases beyond raw power?
Okay. So in general, I would say that running pre-existing models is fairly egalitarian. Like, NVIDIA has the best support. Like, you can load any AI application and it'll run on NVIDIA, and that's fine. But when it comes to using and personalizing models, so that's going to be running your low-rank adaptations, that's going to be any scripts for fine-tuning and so on. Those are almost NVIDIA exclusive, and I kind of think that AMD and Intel, like, it doesn't take that long to write a script to do that. I think you guys should be like thinking about some of these nice to haves to let some of the early developers kind of get their feet wet, and maybe you can write some of the scripts to help these developers, fine tune and personalize models, because like that's how AI developers get started, right? As they do these smaller scale changes, and that kind of snowballs into more experience that they can use for other bigger applications. And, if they do it while using your product, they'll really know how to optimize it for your product.
So Compressor Earthflux writes in and says, what is your current favorite vendor for AI? And what about their implementation stands out above the competition? You're saying NVIDIA, and you just said why, right? Maybe not.
Don't know if I would say they're my favorite. They're the best supported, and I purchased them begrudgingly, but wow, do they gouge you on VRAM. I actually think that my favorite overall is currently ROCm. They have a really diverse stack of hardware available to them, because you can deploy on like CPU, GPU, FPGA if you want to, which, by the way, FPGAs use memory very differently than like a GPU does. So you can actually get around a lot of memory bottlenecks with an FPGA. Not relevant for us in gaming, but, kind of interesting. Intel is also very interesting. And I think like the number one advantage that they have is that they have like a really good in-house software stack. Like they have a lot of really good libraries and so on. And I think the number one thing that Intel could do, particularly with their upcoming generation, is if they just write like load balancing libraries that let you dynamically load balance AI models between like the GPU and the CPU, or the GPU and iGPU and the AI engine and everything. That would actually be huge, because hey man, you have an A770 that costs like what? It's been as low as like $300, and you pair that with like an Intel CPU and one of these libraries, and then all of a sudden it feels like a 24 gigabyte GPU,
Well, so let me directly ask, though, what is AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel doing right and wrong with their AI developer outreach and just their AI initiatives in general, in your opinion?
So NVIDIA got in early, got a lot of community support, and they're the standard, which is good. But the crown is heavy and it's theirs to lose, right? I think they did win a lot of goodwill by being easy to use and being well supported across their product stack, really, right? But I also hear people complaining about their VRAM every single day. Like every single day, I hop into Discord for Pygmalion, and like I hear somebody complain about Nvidia's VRAM, right? And hey, you maybe can get away with not fixing that with your upcoming gen, but people are starting to pay attention. They're starting to say, hey, we're paying, $40,000 for, an H100. Like, why does it cost this much? This is ridiculous.
And so you think that as much as NVIDIA is the standard and as much as they've won a lot of goodwill with really just the quality of life things they do in addition to like everything they've built up for AI, that they're definitely charging for it. And if that goodwill only goes so far, right? And if a competitor comes in and just can get even close while giving you quadruple the memory, like this is a might you say this is a silly blind spot for them to have when they have the market? Don't lose it, right?
So internally, with the Aphrodite engine, I'm actually willing to say that we would not have gone out of our way to add support for ROCm if, well, okay, people in our community were asking for it, so we did it, and we're beholden to our community because we're an open source project. But I honestly think it's possible we might not have added in ROCm support if NVIDIA had been like 30% cheaper, or if they'd had like another tier of VRAM.
Like, and it's that simple that they might be able to just stonewall the competition out of the market. And this is
I don't know if they can stonewall them now, because
so that's already missed. Now the question is, do you give us enough VRAM so that they don't keep taking more market share? Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
They missed their chance.
Do you stem the bleeding with VRAM, or do you, or do you not? Which they might just choose not to.
It's funny, how many of these discussions with people with NVIDIA, it's just like, what could they do better? I don't know, be less greedy. Like, that's what it keeps coming down to, right? Like, people would not forgive the mistakes AMD and Intel make if you just charged a little less,
Yeah.
Like, but you're making it so we have to forgive them.
Or, hey, man, like, if you're going to charge the same amount, that's fine. Just give us more VRAM. It's not hard, because they had like the A6000, which had 48 gigs, and I want to say they had a 48 gigabyte professional card the previous gen.
Yep,
somewhere.
they did. I think it was the Quadro 8000.
Oh yeah, okay. And then the RTX 6000 ADA, confusingly named, but anyway. That one's also 48 gigs.
That was weird to me. Like, I was like, really? You could go higher. Why? What's going on?
So I don't know, man. If the next high-end professional card, if that's not 64 gigs, and if that's not reflected across the stack, I think like a lot of people are gonna start to get really annoyed. Because that does like fall down the stack too. Like, if you had a 64 gigabyte professional card, well, half that RAM is what like the next 90 class would use in theory, right? And hey, man, the 4090 feels mighty right now, but if we're running a lot of AI locally in video games, maybe like you will need 32 gigs by the end of the generation, right? For high-end stuff.
So what would you say AMD could do better than, and the same for Intel?
So for AMD, I think similar to Intel, they're like a full stack AI hardware vendor where they sell the CPU, the platform, they sell the GPU. I think they could do like some sort of full stack integration, like some sort of dynamic load balancing between their various compatible processors of whatever type they happen to be. But I think the number one thing AMD needs to do is they just need to support all of their new GPUs going forward in ROCm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the number one thing. That was a super confusing thing where I actually got started with Pygmalion AI, just helping people in the Discord. And a lot of the questions were about like, okay, I'm on AMD, like, what do I do? And like, the first answer was, okay, you have to install Linux. The second answer was like, well, I don't think your GPU is supported. Like, you can try and export an environment variable, but it's not supported, so it's not a guarantee, right?
Why do you think they're doing that? Do you think a lot of work goes into making each one of them supported, and so they're just not bothering and saying, well, then buy that one? Or why?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is that ROCm is actually a volunteer effort by their devs, if I'm not mistaken. So when you only have like a limited amount of resources, it's really hard to support your whole hardware stack. Like, especially like ROCm 4, that was like what, 2017, 2018 or something. Like, they didn't have a lot of money or resources to throw around then, particularly because like compute on GPU wasn't as big a selling point as it is now. So I kind of understand it. But going forward, like, even just in terms of developer experience, like, AMD, people want to buy your GPUs. They love the way they look. It's just they want support with the GPU.
Right. And it's like, well, Nvidia calls itself an AI company now, so they're going to just make sure every single thing with an Nvidia sticker can do every single thing with AI, whether it runs well or not, because this is just what they're about now. If AMD wants to call themselves an AI company too, you got to do what Nvidia is doing, which is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm actually like pretty happy with ROCm as a whole as a developer. It's annoying to install, and it's kind of weirdly supported on Windows and even on Linux. It's kind of installing, it's weird. I've actually never been able to walk a new person through installing AMD's ROCm suite on Linux. Officially, the only way I've been able to do it is tell them, okay, download Arch and then install it through the community repos, because they have an easier installation method than AMD does themselves. So I think working on that kind of cross-stack GPU support and the ease of developer access to this stuff is going to be super important in 2024.
Yeah, AMD needs to stop acting like this is a bonus that their stuff can do, and they need to start acting like they're an AI company that actually is trying to make it work all the time, right?
Yeah, because like, hey, apps are going to be a huge driver of your APUs going forward. You're trying to sell that they have an AI engine. Like, you need apps written for the AI engine. So like, I hope you can get the developers on board.
Well, it's that time of year again. The time of costumes, family, friends, and of course also eating lots of unhealthy candy and food. It's also simultaneously usually when most people are crunching to finish up the work they need to for the year before the holidays. And while you're crunching, that usually means you're also likely to eat other unhealthy foods in between those bouts of eating unhealthy food with family and friends. Well, that's of course unless you eat Vite Ramen. This piece of content is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, including new flavors like Radiant Crab Roux, and also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break that's sometimes away from home. Or they also have other healthy products like their Nano Boost powder that makes any food at least a little healthy. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BrokenSilicon to get 10% off a variety of products from Vite Ramen, like special bundles for Moore's Law's Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes with their noodles, and other food products, powders, and utensils, and more. They really are a plucky, small, startup that has been really good to Moore's Law is Dead for years now. And I also genuinely like their product. So if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead, try Vite Ramen. And, just clicking on that link in the description really helps a ton. But buying their product and using the offer code Broken Silicon, of course, helps the channel even more. Try Vite Ramen today. Carbon Cry writes in, he says, could we see AMD eschew releasing ROCm or ROCm on their gaming GPUs in order to avoid export bans to the PRC? Is that a factor here?
I don't think that's why they have limited ROCm support, because they support it on their current top-end gaming GPU. So that's like a really weird way to avoid bans. And the other thing too is I think like the US is really serious about these bans. Nvidia has been trying to sidestep them with, I don't know if you heard about it, but the 4090 Dragon. And the US essentially said like, look, like don't. And so I think like if ROCm support was an issue for them getting like export controls, I don't think they would put it on their 7900 XTX. That seems like a really weird decision. No, I think it's just that, hey man, supporting like an AI hardware stack is difficult.
All right. Now what about Intel? What could they do better?
So I get to listen to a lot of people talk about their opinions on GPUs and hardware and software stacks. And people are paying attention to Intel in this space. Like I see people talking like constantly about like, hey, the A770 looks really good. I might buy it for AI. And like, hey man, they're so cheap. Maybe I'll just buy two. There's no 32 gigabyte GPUs out there, so I'll make my own, essentially, right? And people are paying attention to you. And a big reason for that is that Intel's software stack is fairly pleasant to work with, and it's fairly easy to install, and they offer really good VRAM for the price. But the reason a lot of other people had like AMD GPUs and Nvidia GPUs lying around to use for AI is because they bought them for gaming first, right? So I think with upcoming gens, one thing to keep in mind is that 16 gigabytes of VRAM was actually like a decent selling point for the A770. But that's not going to be a huge selling point for a next-gen GPU. That's kind of going to be expected at that point. Intel is the only GPU vendor that doesn't have like a strong professional graphics card line. So I think the one thing they could do that would really, really disrupt the industry and really put a wrench in the cogs of AMD and Nvidia is, what if their top-end GPU next gen just has like 32 gigabytes of VRAM clamshelled onto it? That
like gaming or you're just saying both. Like the one thing even if it's weak, like the thing you're suggesting is if let's say Battle Mage is just Alchemist again in terms of performance, like they're struggling to beat, I don't know, the 4060 is barely stronger than the 3060. That's probably not the right comparison. But like, let's say we're in 2025 or like Blackwell's out. RDNA 4 launched late 2024, and all they have is something that can compete with like a 5060, a 4070 that's already 2 years old, or I don't know what it would be called, an RX 8600, whatever. Give it 32 gigabytes and sell it for the price you can stomach. And that's like the gimmick they should keep doing.
That's the only thing I can think of with their GPU stack. Like talking to people who are interested in running AI locally, like talking to developers, like, yeah, they made a splash with Alchemist because it had so much VRAM for the price. And you used an interesting turn of phrase, the lowest that they can stomach, but I actually think that if you're looking at like a 16 gigabyte, let's call it a B750, for instance, maybe it's not as upper high end as they felt that the A770 was. So hypothetical B750.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at like a 16 gigabyte variant, I think you're going to be selling that like potentially at a loss because AXG
Yeah.
has like a bit of a reputation problem, and it's really hard to sell them.
Yeah,
I'm
a
being
bit of
polite.
one.
I am Canadian. I have to be polite. But I think that doubling that VRAM up to 32 gigabytes, that's a distinctly professional level. Yeah, you can't charge professional prices for it, but I think you can charge more than the increase in VRAM for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
let's say,
yeah, if the
hypothetically,
competition continues to not give you any more,
yeah. So hypothetically, like if a $500 16 gigabyte GPU would be like whatever breaking even, and then adding 32 gigs of RAM costs what, $120 or
Yeah, probably around there,
okay,
depending
so
on where
adds
prices go.
$120. Well, I think you can charge like 680, maybe 699, just in this example.
Mm-hmm.
And like people are going to look at it because, like, well, what's their other option? Like they want 32 gigs of RAM, and Nvidia and AMD don't want to do that because they have professional GPU lines that they don't want to cannibalize, right?
Mm-hmm. How
And
much of this, though, do you think is like they need to do this in gaming, and how much of it is they just need to make a professional 32 gigabyte card? I guess they kind of have to do both if they launch one, though, right? I mean,
I think that they might be able to get away with like a media blitz where they do release like a 32 gigabyte card, and they go to like a mod developer, they go to somebody like a Bethesda who has a Skyrim that's fairly modifiable, and they say, hey, we have this like API that lets us run like AI. Can you let us show like people interacting with a character in an AI driven way running locally on this GPU? And then we'll tell people that like this is the future of gaming. I think that if they did that marketing right, like it could work. Where they just like hack support into a game that doesn't even normally have it, and they say this is what future games could look like. And something to keep in mind is even if performance isn't great on their next GPU, well, in AI, VRAM is performance because you're not moving between devices so much. Like you can really save a lot of lost performance by being able to fit everything on a single card.
it's funny, though. One thing that I'm thinking of now is the last guest that was on, James Pryor. He said he doesn't believe in cannibalization. He says if you cannibalize your own product, all you're doing is making a sales success before your competition exploited one of your weaknesses. Like, does all AMD have to do is launch a 32 gigabyte card for like 650, 700, and its entire concept probably wouldn't make a difference, though?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, if AMD launches a 32 gigabyte card, I mean, ROCm support isn't the best out there, but it's becoming a close second to CUDA. So I think if you factor in like, hey, I'm getting relatively stable graphics drivers, I'm getting ROCm, which is fine, and then I'm getting, 32 gigabytes for a reasonable price and power use for AMD. And like, yeah, I think that would actually prevent Intel from succeeding with this plan.
It's funny we talk about that, though, because I think, there's just no way around it. One of the things that made AMD's Polaris actually sell pretty dang well during a time period when AMD was almost going out of business in 2017, people or 2016, I should say. They really were. And you had a situation where Nvidia had a $300, let's remember, first couple months, that's what it was, like a $300 1060 that used 120 watts, and AMD's strongest card that was new that they were making consumed 150 watts and wasn't any stronger than it. It did have 8 GB though. Like AMD did give it 8 GB, and it did work. And by virtue of just deciding to do that, Polaris ended up actually, I think their market share was kind of okay. It really didn't collapse until, well, I don't need to get into it because it's complicated what their market share really was because of mining it. Same with Nvidia. But, I wonder with like RDNA 4, which I believe is going to stop at mid-range, that they'd probably, if it turns out well, want to call it the 8800 XT. It turns out well, meaning it's at least as strong as a 4080. It's like, here's your $500 16 gigabyte 4080. The next Polaris moment. If it turned out extra well, like let's say it ended up beating the 4080 or even slightly beating 4080 Super, I have thought in the back of my head, they'd be stupid to not launch a 32 gigabyte for like 700, because it doesn't really matter what Nvidia is doing. At that level of performance with that much RAM, it's going to feel like a high-end card anyways to some people. So I don't know. I guess we'll see, right, though. But it's
also worth noting, just cutting in here, sorry.
Go ahead.
The W7800 is like already, I don't know, like analogous to like a 7800 XT or whatever. And it has 32 gigabytes already. So they already have a professional card in that range. So I don't think if they essentially like re-release that level of performance that people are going to be scrambling to buy an RDNA 4 32 gigabyte professional card. So if they're not going to be selling that anyway, why wouldn't they just do a 32 gigabyte consumer card?
Mm-hmm. Well, they will probably have a professional version with 32 gigabytes though, right? So that would be a consideration, I think. But, it's interesting to think about this, all of this as well, because really what it sounds like you're saying with Intel is what they need to do is just do the things other people are too stingy to do. But it kind of sounds like you're saying that's all they can do. And like, as much as that is a fun thing to think about them doing as a tactic, I mean, that's still like you're telling them like AMD's best play is just, support everything, do more outreach. Nvidia, you're a little less greedy, you can control the market. But yeah, they're already making so much money. Your suggestion to Nvidia is to still make a lot of money. The only suggestion you're giving to Intel is hope they don't respond to you making no money on a card you're selling, though. It doesn't sound like is there anything else Intel is doing like really well, though? You think they can be a major player in AI and other aspects? Or are you saying, no, MI300 and H100 destroy Ponte Vecchio? No, their APUs are going to be behind in AI for a couple of years. Like, am I missing it, or is that
the one thing they can do is they have a really good software team, actually, and they have really good support across their stack in AI, at least. Now, maybe not as much community support, but whatever. So the one thing I think they can do is they can write libraries that make it feel great to develop for Intel. Think about like how Nvidia got like the drop with like, say, DLSS and ray tracing, right? Well, if you're looking at where AI is right now in terms of, support and what you need to do to run it, we're kind of at that phase where it is really important to get developers on board. I think if Intel can get some really good software standards going for AI that, support everybody, but support Intel more, I think you could see a thing where they're on the downturn. They don't have a lot of money coming in, but they still have their software team. They can still do it, but they have to be very smart about how they do their software. And I think like I said, the one thing that I could see them doing that makes sense is like load balancing between their CPUs and their GPUs, right? For AI.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let me start pivoting this though to a new conversation. Because what I basically have left here is like a series of like kind of miscellaneous questions, if you wouldn't mind. Techno writes in and he says, do you think we will see average consumer devices with integrated MPUs that outperform the H100 in TOPS by 2032 or something like that. How far away do you think we are from reaching 1 billion? Well, let's just leave it. Let's leave the question as that. Like, with how fast things are advancing, do you think we're going to run into a situation in 10 years from now, maybe less than 10 years, where actually these like supercomputer AI levels of performance, they're going to be able to fit that into like a smartphone in 10 years or a laptop in just one part of it too?
I think that I don't even know if memory speeds would actually keep up with that,
Right.
to make like doing that worth it. So if I was to describe it, I think it looks a lot like an S curve where we started at this really low level of performance just because it was basically free to throw it on the SoC just to get people started. And then, it ramps up and it ramps up and like, oh, wow, Strix Point is out and that has a lot. And then who knows what like the Zen 5 and Zen 6 APUs are going to have. And, over time, I think it's going to taper off and we're going to settle at like a relatively comfortable amount of AI performance in our products. But the thing is what I think is going to scale is not necessarily the hardware, but I think it's going to be the software is going to scale really well. Because if you look back at even how Pygmalion went, we had like a 330 million parameter model, which is like nothing. And then there was like a 1.5 billion, and then a 3 billion, and then a 6 billion, which is where we hit our breakout thing. That 6 billion parameter model released during, I think, the peak of the silicon shortage, is like almost a joke compared to modern AI models. And that's like a year and a half back. I think what you're going to see is that like future AI models are going to run very comfortably with fairly modest hardware compared to what you're thinking of. And you're
I think
gonna
there's
have
a reader mail about
experience.
that too. Like you're saying, no, you think we will find ways to shrink it down too. Like it's more about that.
Yeah, shrinking down the model. Like when we started running AI, like Pygmalion 6 billion took like 24 gigs of VRAM to run comfortably. And like who had like a 24 gigabyte VRAM card, like other than the 3090 at the time? Well, nobody. But then, we discovered quantization. There's other stuff like flash attention. Xformers got better supports. All of this stuff happened that like let you run these like really quite big models in very modest hardware, and like that's only going to keep going. And I think so. To answer the question directly, I don't think we're going to have like today's supercomputers in our pockets, although that's certainly a possibility. I think you're just not going to need a supercomputer in your pocket because like the software is going to come so far so fast.
All right. Compressor Earthblocks writes in and he says, I don't think it's a secret that the AI market is growing faster than anyone anticipated a few years ago. Well, besides maybe Jensen Wang. Lisa Su said it herself. It's as big as the internet was. That being said, when does the growth stop? When does AI just become a commonplace thing in games like SSAO or anti-aliasing? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? How do you see this exponential curve going? And I guess I'll add my own version or little addendum to his question, which is, do you think there's a chance that the floor could fall out in the AI bubble sooner than expected? Not because AI is not here to stay, but just because actually maybe the market's already priced in so much more. Like the hype's just so big that they priced in too much already.
So if you asked me this at like the peak of, let's say, the .com bubble, and you asked like if the internet would keep going, well, in retrospect, we know that it has. I think it's a similar thing where everybody was shocked by AI. It did new things that just couldn't be done before. And, that caught a lot of people off guard. And there was a lot of hype on Wall Street for these really anything related to AI. There was a lot of hype for. But I think you're going to see that there were a lot of extraneous use cases. You're going to see people, selling off GPUs and so on and so forth kind of come early 2024, I think. And that is going to happen, but how long does a crash last for?
Right.
And then, two, the other thing is when there is a crash, people are going to sell off all of this hardware that they didn't really need to buy. They just bought because they thought they had to or they were missing out. And that's going to create like cheap used hardware on eBay for scrappy startups to use. And one of them might be like the next really big, really convincing reason to use AI. So I think like we're going to see a steady growth from like 2025 onward, and you're going to see people sort of settle into what AI can actually do.
It sounds like you're saying you think, and no one's gonna kill you if you're wrong. But am I incorrect to interpret that what you're kind of saying is you think that this could all crash sooner, not later, sooner rather than later, but the crash won't be as crazy as the .com crash. Like you're like, no, yeah, maybe like within a year, we're gonna see a lot of companies realize they didn't need 1,000 H100s, and then there will be some sort of localized to different parts of the market crash. But after that, it's not going to be as drastic as hopefully it was with other crashes, and then there's just steady growth. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, that's kind of roughly what I'm thinking. And
it makes sense to me, though.
Kind of thinking like ultra long term here, like 2028, 29, 2030, I think AI won't be like as much of a buzzword, obviously, because it'll have been around for such a long time. But I think you're going to look back and you're going to realize, holy shit, everything I do is AI in some way. In the same way that like everything we do now is internet in some way. And before that, everything we did then was electricity in some way. And that's just kind of how these things work.
Yeah, on the note of electricity, by the way, I have one of those like plasma lighters. It was like $10 on Amazon. You like plug it in to charge it up, and it just makes like a little electrical arc, and that's what you do to light a candle. I keep thinking like if we show that to someone in the 50s, their mind would explode. They're like, "What lighter are you using?" I'm like, "Oh, it uses plasma, like that element that state of matter we never talk about." It actually does that. And they're like, whoa, was that like $1,000 lighter for rich people? It's like $10 and I just plug it into the wall to charge it. Like, it is funny to think of how much, like just even the electricity example at this point, we're using it to make fire that we recharge for pennies. Like, it's crazy how far we've come, right? Let me see here. Keekum writes in, do you see a limit to ways artificial intelligence will be utilized in content if they had the hardware available to support it? I think, is this the same question as another one we had later here? But I think it's just kind of like the idea is if you had unlimited performance, what are our limits of using AI right now? Right? Like you have a million tops. All right. Well, still, what are the things we can't do with AI for a while because we just don't know how to yet?
So I'm going to say complex reasoning and decision making is like kind of a hard one at the moment. Like if you look at how these language models handle things like mathematics, logical problems, and so on, it's really hard. And my suspicion is that part of that is like we just need to figure out our data sets better. Like there's probably a lot of extraneous data that you don't need there, and that's going to make things better too. But I also think that there's probably some sort of architectural change that I can't visualize right now. Like I use AI, but I'm not like an AI researcher. I do personally want to experiment with this stuff, but I do think that complex multi-step decision making is pretty difficult.
Which is funny because 20 years ago, that's what people thought AI was, just acting like a human, using a computer that acts like a human. In reality, you think that type of use case is very far away, and it's all of these other things we're using it for now. Give us unlimited performance.
Cut you off there. It's very far away in AI time.
Okay.
So
you're saying in the short term, you don't think we're going to do that soon?
For 2024, yeah. So I actually saw really good comments on a YouTube video related to AI, and they noted It's been like a really slow week in AI. I haven't heard anything in like 13 hours.
Yeah.
Because like when you were really into AI, especially during like the silicon shortage, as a matter of coincidence, it wasn't because of the silicon shortage, but anyway, you would hear about like 3 AI announcements like every single day, and every single one was super important. And a lot of stuff from that is like now super commonplace. Things like distilled data sets, LoRa's fine tuning, PFT, like all this stuff, RLHF, and like AI moves fast, and the things that were impossible yesterday are kind of commonplace now.
Well, it's funny you say that. In the last video I put out about AMD's AI event, I said that as much as MI300 isn't really launching a year after H100, it feels like it's launching 3 years after it, because it's just how important that timing was and how fast AI was moving. It really does feel like they're launching it a generation later, like, and so I completely understand what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe you'll have me back on the podcast next year and I'll say, okay, I was kind of wrong here. We solved multi-step reasoning and logical problems like 6 months ago, and here's the new set of problems that we won't be able to solve for 3 years. And then, you have me on the next year after that and I'll say, yeah, we solved that 9 months ago.
Certainly I'll be having you and a bunch of people on if that happened that quickly to talk about that. But all right, well, let me move on to some final questions then. Compressed Earthblocks writes in and he says, simple questions. Is AI the wrong tool long-term for developers? Will it cause more harm than we think of it? It can, and will it hamper creativity? I'm not saying AI doing small tasks, but taking on large chunks of programming, replacing voice and actors and writers and other industry talents and generating assets. Is this something we should really be working on?
Well, I mean, if you take a time machine back to the really early days of social media and you ask them about the societal impact of like Facebook before everybody realized it was evil, like, I don't know if they would have given you like a super good answer to that, right? And I don't know that they would have predicted that it would make people feel, more separated from one another than connected, right? And in the same way, I do think AI is going to change things. I think there's going to be impacts that we can't foresee now. And like, we do need to think about those going forward. But at the same time, I also don't think that what we had before AI was perfect, right? Like, productivity has stagnated for quite a long time. And AI really feels like it might be the thing to scale productivity better. And what it comes down to is not necessarily the technology itself, but the people who are implementing it and how they're going about it, and how are people using it. Like anything else, it's a tool and it can absolutely be misused, but I also think it has great potential, and that's why I'm working at an AI startup.
Right. Like when it comes to like the internet and social media, there's these new issues where parts of the population feel more isolated because of it. And it also certainly allows questionable types of people to communicate with each other better and organize horrible events that they couldn't do before. But at the same time, you also have the ability for people to stay connected in ways they couldn't before. Businesses can communicate in ways they couldn't before across the entire world. And you also have a lot of things that have like benefited humanity because of our ability to move and communicate things way quicker than ever before. So it's like, am I wrong that your opinion basically is overall things will be better, but as always, we will create new problems we're going to have to solve?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is I think it is an example of progress, and I think there's going to be good things, but I also think there's going to be things we need to watch out for.
Avaldion writes, and he says, hello, Tom and Dest. How are you dealing with the ethics of deep neural networks? Are you stealing and scraping the internet for copyrighted work to make your models, or are you training them upon your own work, or those of people you have agreed to work with? And are you conscious that it is but a matter of time before governments hit the big reset button because of copyright infringements? That's something I've heard a lot of people suggest might happen. When I sent a screenshot of this post to an artist friend, she was pretty mad, and I think rightfully so. She told me she didn't even want to hear what you had to say. So this person's coming in hot, stating that you'd probably like all of the other AI devs anyway. So please prove us both wrong and prove that some researchers actually do care about the ethics of it all. Because I've experienced firsthand how many people see artists in AI now, and man, artists don't like it. Their points of view are terrifyingly close to how they think people thought slavery worked. They knew it was wrong. They knew the artists were suffering and being abused by the system, yet they did not care, as their only excuse was, well, my life is hard too. And whether slavery is right or wrong, it was necessary to push forward with industrialization. So I thought that was, this is, not an easy question, but I think an interesting comparison there. I'm wondering what you would say.
Well, first of all, and this is actually something directed directly at that friend. AI is changing things, and that friend spent a lot of years developing a skill set that they thought they would be able to pursue a career in, and they're probably really passionate about it, and that's why they did it. And this new thing is coming in, and it's like really heavily impacting that, and it's 100% understandable to feel like annoyed and to feel like attacked by it. I get it. And if they hear nothing else from me, I hope they hear that. So earlier part of the question, are you stealing and scraping the internet for copyrighted work? So I'm not directly on the dataset team, but I do work with them, and I hear a lot about a lot of the things they're doing. But I think there's a really important distinction to make when it comes to data and AI. The earlier in the process that you use the data, the less it learns about like the style of the data, and the less that data impacts the experience of somebody using that model. So, for instance, if I showed like an AI model, like a diffusion model, early into its training process, like a picture of a person, they're not really going to learn a person. They're going to learn like a vague outline, like a blob. And so, with that context in mind, we do use a lot of very popular open data sets. So I want to say stuff like Red Pajamas, I think, is in there, which, again, AI names. Okay, even if you don't like AI companies, you have to like our names.
Well, I was thinking, by the way, as I said the names are silly. Are they really any less silly than naming your company Yahoo?
Fair enough.
I think it might just be, I realized, wait, just a modern context that I think this sounds weird. There's been making silly names for decades. So what am I saying?
So, yeah, we do have something like Red Pajamas in there, I believe. Open Assistant, which Open Assistant is actually all volunteers, I believe. And, if I really went looking through our data set, I think I could probably find some gray data somewhere, possibly not even that we threw in intentionally. It might just have like shown up there because it was in the other data sets already. But for the most part, a lot of the data sets that we use earlier in the process for pre-training, for the earlier fine-tuning, I think a lot of those are going to be things that have been used in like another project already. So if there's any societal harm to be had from it, you could make the argument that it's already been had, which, whatever. But a lot of our most important data, so that's going to be the stuff that really directly impacts how people use our AI models, and like really determines the character of them, and how you experience them. A lot of this stuff is going to be coming from our community directly, because we actually directly take, as volunteer submissions, we take role play logs from our community, and they're kind enough to go in and edit them appropriately to be high quality data, because sometimes the models make mistakes. So they go in, have an RP session with the bot, and then they edit it to be a very high quality point of data, and we use a lot of that to really nail down the feel of our models.
So what do you think about what could happen though with a copyright reset button? Because that was something Brian was telling me too. Bring him up again. Heemskirk, that pretty much a lot, he's an artist, and he will sometimes use Mid-Journey for ideation, but as a point, it's not an ethics thing. It is a point of safety that his company is already saying, make sure you don't use any AI art in the game, though, because we think long term someone's going to make an AI system that can reverse engineer what you probably used to make that. And if they can, every company on Earth is about to get sued, and we don't want to be one of those companies. What do you think about the idea of that happening? I mean, I think more just from a logical perspective, I'm curious what your answer is, but then I'm also curious if you have any ethical thoughts.
So, with regards to how do I put this? So reverse engineering, if something was done by AI, that's a cat and mouse game. I think a lot of early AI products, it will be fairly possible to determine that it was AI generated. But once that Sherlock software is out there, you kind of know how to plan around it as an AI developer. So an unscrupulous one might specifically plan to make their AI appear less AI generated, and so they might game the system in that way. And so it's going to be a cat and mouse game. And eventually, what I think you're going to end up with is nobody's going to know what's AI generated or not. And I don't know what kind of time scale that is. But with regards to literally a hard AI reset, I think that's actually one of the bigger concerns that could happen. And it's not necessarily a concern because oh, I don't have a job because there's no AI startups anymore. And it's not a concern in the sense of oh, we don't have AI anymore. I think what's going to happen is, if there is something like that, the only companies that are going to be able to compete in AI in the long term are probably going to be really big existing companies. And I don't know about you, but I kind of don't like that you can't buy Photoshop and that you have to pay what is it, $100 a month subscription. I actually don't know if that's what it is.
No, or how much. I mean, there's, of course, if you go to cdkeyoffer.com, you can get Windows software for a good price, but how many hoops you have to jump through just to get a word processor that you kind of have to have, right?
Yeah. And having these big companies that have huge control over your life by just being the first mover and becoming a Goliath in the industry, that actually legitimately does scare me, because there's so many things with productivity that can be done with AI. Could OpenAI keep a future internal version of ChatGPT that's better than the public version, right? And then they just use it for internal development, and they can just accelerate faster than everybody. That's actually a possibility. And I think the reason I'm so passionate about working on an AI project is because if AI is going to exist, I think it should be for everybody.
And you don't want it to happen. What might happen to AI. You don't want it to be a situation where we've seen this with a lot of other industries where just right out of the gate, like the top 10 biggest companies just take control over all of it immediately, right? That's something that you're worried could happen if, depending on how the letter of the law is written, it just turns into yet another example of only the biggest companies can afford to follow the law or afford to innovate in a way that keeps them competitive.
Yeah. And like that is actually one of the biggest possible concerns with being in an open source AI company at the moment is, that could happen. And like that's actually very concerning to me. So one thing I actually do think that you should think about as somebody who is even just like if you moderately don't like AI is you might want to think about why very, very carefully over the next year here. And if it's specifically because you feel that like AI art, for the sake of example, is theft, like that's fine. All good. I understand why you would feel that way. And if you feel that like it should be regulated because it's not fair, because like regular artists might not be able to compete in like an AI driven economy, like that's very much a possibility. I think regardless of what your reason is, you should think about it very carefully because one area I'm looking into personally is something called synthetic data. So that's going to be data that isn't like found on the web. This is something that you generate yourself. So an example would be using Blender geometry nodes to create like thousands of variations of a specific scene to help more precisely teach an AI diffuser model like what you're training for. And there's been like a lot of pressure to use less and less data all the time because there's just not that much on the internet with regards to training AI models. And like we've made great progress in that area. Like if you look at the size of data needed to train Stable Diffusion, it was massive, but there's been architectural improvements since, and people have pruned the LAION data sets. And you can make like a very similar quality model to the original Stable Diffusion with a very tiny data set. And I think it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then like there's other advances too. Like you can do multimodal models. So that's going to be like a language and an image model. And the interesting thing about AI is it can generalize. So if you teach it 1 + 2 = 3, 2 + 2 = 4, 3 + 2 = 5, so on and so forth, you can cut some of those out completely from the data set, and it'll still understand how to do that mathematical operation. So in the same way, you can actually like write a textbook on how to produce the type of art you want. You can pre-train it with a bunch of synthetic data, and you can use a ton of RLHF. And in like 2 to 3 years, I think we might see a no art model. And so I'm going to say I have a lot of friends in the animation industry. I have a lot of friends who are artists. And for me, the scariest future on their behalf is not one where AI bros need artists to generate data for their models. The scariest future is one where they don't.
That's certainly an interesting thought. Like it's getting, like you're saying, it could get to the point where, and this is why you said it, right? This is why you said, think long and hard about why you don't like this. Is it because they're stealing, or is it for another reason? Because they might not need to steal in the future, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and like, hey man, if your argument against AI is that it's theft, well, okay, what happens when they make it all themselves? So just food for thought,
I guess one follow-up thought to that, though, something that I thought was interesting, brought up by Brian Heemskirk. Which I'm just going to say it again. I'm going to plug the last episode he was on. I don't think it was in the title, but I think like the last 45 minutes is about AI. I think that'd be a very good companion conversation to this one. He brought up which I thought I like arguments like this that kind of sidestep like the initial passionate emotional worries and just go into the practical worry. The practical worry he had isn't a lot of the things that young writers, artists, whatever do is the grunt work that now AI will do. No, in other words, for the next 20 years, maybe art will actually get better because the best minds will use AI to save them time to write good Hollywood scripts. And they're still going to be needed to make the script. So they're just going to make them faster and better. But then 20 years from now, there was no grunt work for the intern to do. So we never raised the next generation of great artists. Is that something that you've thought about, though, or that you're concerned about? Because I think that sidesteps the initial emotional worries that I think are very legitimate, but it goes straight to, practically speaking, could we set ourselves back if we're not doing something to allow people to become better at what they do, to even be able to use AI effectively to accelerate their work?
So I kind of tend to think that it will actually depend on the specific area of AI. Like currently, to produce like good AI art, you need to do like a really big workflow. Actually, you have to generate the image, possibly with control net. You have to upscale it in like really specific ways and then send that back to be in painted. And you have to do like this really big, huge process, which is actually, you could argue that after it's a big enough process, like maybe it kind of is artistic. But then in the future, if diffusion models get so good, or if there's like a new architecture that replaces diffusion models, if it gets you a really good result with just a really short prompt, oh yeah, I think it gets really weird. How do artists like really practice their fundamentals? How do they practice their high level skills? Like, do they learn, rule of thirds? Do they learn where they want stuff to go in the image? Do they learn, composition and color management? And could you have a generation of people that can't express themselves properly? Is it going to be like people who are typically in like a third world country? Sometimes parents will try and raise their kids on English exclusively without using their native language, but the parents don't know English well enough to teach it. So the children end up with no first language and they don't know how to express themselves properly. And I think depending on how it's used, you could actually see a similar thing with AI. But on the other hand, when I find, a few minutes to chat with some of our models internally, for instance, I've noticed that like 80% of my time, even factoring in the generation time, is spent trying to think about where I want the story to go, how I want the characters to act, like what I want to do with it. And it's almost like an interactive writing process, like collaborating with somebody. And so it is different to solo writing, but I still think there are like really interesting fundamentals of storytelling being practiced there. So I think, in short, I have to give like the worst, most lawyery answer. It depends. Like, it really will depend on area and how automated things get and so on and so forth. And
yeah, it's interesting because I think one thing that came up in that Brian Heemskirk conversation was I suggested, well, I'm just throwing in this in there before that too. Like, it's almost like with social media is fine. Like, we just can't let kids use it. And like, art will be fine. Don't let them use AI generation until you're sure they've learned the fundamentals, though, or they'll never learn the fundamentals. And I can't help but wonder if like a situation will emerge where like the economies, the countries with the best education systems, and actually the best, not the ones that call themselves the best. I think that a lot of people are questioning which education systems even work anymore, but like will set themselves up to just use it better and do well. And maybe especially in some poorer countries, they don't learn the fundamentals of anything. They just use AI generation, which can get them to 10%, but it never gets them to making the best thing. And it could like set back groups because they never learned the fundamentals. This is something I'm thinking about now too.
So in the coding space, you actually do see this where a lot of people learned to code recently, and they do it under the term no code, meaning AI generated, right? And you actually do see a lot of people in, and it's actually kind of unfortunate in some ways, in third world countries who don't have access to resources to teach them code the traditional ways, so they learn to prompt AI. But in a lot of cases, for a lot of types of code, it works well for them, and good on them. I'm glad they're learning something that's letting them make money and move forward in the world. But we might be really short on good systems programmers in like 15 years if that keeps happening and like nobody learns how to actually code. On the other hand,
properly trained ones will make even more money.
yeah. But on the other hand, like who knows? Maybe like AI will be able to truly abstract a lot of those issues away to let people focus on the higher level stuff. Personally, the way I like to think it'll go is people still water paint, people still flint knap. People do all of these things that you could make the argument are outdated and unnecessary. And, some people even have fun making money doing it. And maybe the boring stuff will get automated away and we'll be able to do things because we want to do them.
Yeah, I certainly think that's the best outcome of AI, right? And I'm sure it will only be the best outcome. No, it's probably going to be a mix of both, I think, at the end of the day, and like how things turn out. But hopefully, at least it's mostly the good one. I actually think that's a good note to end on for this episode, unless you had anything else you wanted to bring up.
Nope, I think I got everything I needed. So, yeah. Good
well,
talk.
Please plug yourself, plug as many things as you want, like where can people find you or the things you're working on, or maybe support or check those things out.
Okay, so you can find me at my GitHub if need be. I'm Isaiah Gosner. You can go and contact really any of the developers at Pygmalion AI at the Discord. They're all quite friendly. And yeah, that's about it from me. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I'll have those links in the description. Then, of course, as always, please make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. Please ring the bell button. Subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review. Tell your friends about us. Share this content. Share the other content. And consider supporting us on Patreon, where just $2 a month gets you access to ad-free die shrink bonus content. You get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon, the ability to ask us questions at the right tiers, Discord access. You can talk about this content with me and thousands of other patrons who'd love to discuss it with you in a respectful manner, because it is much more respectful, I find, on the Discord than in the YouTube comment sections half the time. And otherwise, no matter what, though, thank you to everybody for watching, for listening, and have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About / support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Chits, Daniel D, Ian Clifford, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Haig, ZZ Ziggy, Brian Riggleman, MJB1, Sam Miller, Deke, SNES Chalmers, Nicholas Buckner, Jim Ferreira, Valco Malev, Jensen Wang, Andrew S, Gregory Sacker, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, HardForum.com, Chris Rich, Greg Wanchek, 3DS Spoilite, Halbuma, Compressed Earthbox, Shredbird, Dr. Foreman, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Blake, Franco Frederick, Golden Mobley, Jake223, Jake Martin, Sammy Malas, Slicky, Jordan Simkovic, Stefan Hart, Julian Leaked, Meat and Pork, The Boss Haas, Tim Robb, Penta Winter, Travis Gooding, Stefan, Mads, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Roger Davies, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Crow, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Aisha, Mark Radebaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Chrysantine, Colin Tadars, The Eternal Dreamers, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Neithra Zing, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Toko, Reginald Ari, T. Cottom, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Gaming Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Windstar James, I Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Dave Schultz, Melodic Warrior, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bussell, I-711-700K, Jamie Witters, Joe Foot, Hardland, Slushboss, C2, Mai Sharona, Earth Taurus, Jensen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Keith Moore, Himsa Gung, Tails2299, Meal, Val Verga, John, Venti CZ, Sisyphos, The Forbidden Jews, Burleaksman, RB Racer, AC, Richard Cowgill, Win Wing, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Free D, Brian Wright, John Swin, Jola Martina, Geekum, Elbergun, Solarized 80, Thalo215, Matthew Marlowe, Raisin Biscuit, Rennick 1982, Jeff Johnson, Rowan McKickey, Cornster671, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.